I'm going to be privileged to be joined by my two guests today. First, my former colleague, Commentary Magazine columnist and American Enterprise Institute scholar, Christine Rosen. Hi, Christine.
Hi, Noah. Nice to see you.
Thank you so much for joining me. And my current colleague, an editor at National Review and the media fellow at the Institute for Human Ecology, Jack Butler. Hi, Jack.
Oh, Noah, thanks for having me.
My pleasure. So this is really in your wheelhouse, Christine. You have a forthcoming book on social media and its perils. So you can help us understand why TikTok is the unique menace that lawmakers have made it out to be, more so than just the general brain poisoning to which consumers of social media are so often exposed. Why is TikTok so much of a threat to American national interests beyond just what it's doing to our children? As unsavory as that might be, perhaps not necessarily rising to the level of a national security threat.
Yes, it's a great question, and actually, I'm glad you opened by talking about the lobbying campaign, which demonstrated exactly why people should want TikTok out of this country and divested from its connection to the CCP. It used first of all, it lied about what the bill did. It said this is a bill that's going to ban TikTok. It does not ban TikTok. That would be in violation of the First Amendment. That would open up a whole can of worms. It's a forced divestiture. It says TikTok can stay, but it has to sever its connections with the Chinese government and the Chinese Communist, which is run obviously by the Chinese Communist Party. As my colleague Klon Kitchen, former CIA guy, says, in general, Americans shouldn't want to walk around with a phone in their pocket that has basically a version of a sensor on it, gathering information about their whereabouts, their movements, their contacts, what they look at, what they browse, that's controlled by an enemy power, which is what China is right now. It's a hostile power. And we know China's been using a lot of sharp power methods to influence things in rival countries, including ours. These weird police stations they've put everywhere. There was the infamous Chinese spy balloon. What TikTok is an exercise of that sort of power. It is getting this on the phone of every American it possibly can.
So let's take it down a notch.
Propaganda.
Just for a second, though, let's digress. Why should you not be able to have a piece of Chinese spyware in your pocket if you so choose? Why is your freedom not extended to the degree to which you can expose your personal information to a hostile foreign power?
Well, first of all,
intuitive, right. But we should illustrate.
Right. I would argue that it's because you also are not getting, it's not just tracking you, it's tracking your interactions with others, and they can't give their consent to being tracked by the Chinese Communist Party. As you infamously know from our many conversations offline, I don't use social media, and there are a number of reasons I don't. But if I talk to someone who has TikTok and they get my contact info, and this is the other thing, we don't know what the algorithm does. That's one of the points of contention with the Chinese Communist Party and the Chinese government saying, because look, if they were just making a business decision, they would immediately comply with these regulations, as many businesses have. They ban our social media apps in China. People aren't allowed to use American social media apps in China. We're doing the same thing. But that's why I think there's plenty of evidence that this isn't just about social media use. It isn't just about money making. They have another purpose. They have a national purpose in wanting to see a CCP-controlled app on as many Americans' phones as possible. And that should concern us.
And it concerns me, Jack. You can answer that question, but how real do you think this backlash was? The degree to which we heard from members of the press that lawmakers were inundated with kids, and they were kids. You could hear it in their voice. You could hear school bells apparently in the background ringing, which is another thing we should talk about, why smartphones are allowed in schools on public property during school hours, but I digress. Congress seems very sensitive to the financial interests involved here, but they've become even more sensitive to the threat and menace posed by these young children going after them, saying, I'm going to hurt myself if you do this. That's unusual.
Well, I think the campaign is real in the sense that it occurred, but it's fake in the sense that it was contrived. I mean, and the fact that it was able to be contrived in that fashion is a great argument for the app's divestiture in the manner that Christine described. If this is something that can be weaponized in that fashion to such an extent that students of minor status would just, who don't even, and I think some of these accounts you're describing, they didn't know like what a congressman was. It's just, I shouldn't laugh about this, but laughter is how I sometimes have to make myself survive these dark times. So I laugh anyway. I mean, that's just despicable. And the fact also that certain students and minor persons would behave in this way is a great argument for, well, it's a great argument for the app not existing at all, but that's not precisely the legislation in question is about. I mean, that would be in the sort of kingdom of Jack. That's what would happen, but we're not in the kingdom of Jack. And as such, the steps that are being taken or that Congress is debating are the best ones that we can reach at this time. But yeah, I would, I mean, certainly if I were a parent, I would not let my children have this app. It seems to warp their minds in ways that are very disfiguring and discomforting, and I'm very unsettled by it. I'm now at a point at age 30 where I no longer understand young people. I'm not allowed to. There's a cutoff. The moment my birthday came around, I just don't get it. I've never used TikTok, and I never will. I understand how it works, though, roughly, and I understand that I don't like it. I've called it evil in print before, and National Review has joined me in that designation. I believe that in an issue last year, Roman Gann produced some incredible art uh, that had Barad-dûr, the Tower of Sauron from Lord of the Rings, but instead of Sauron's eye, it had the TikTok logo. That is basically how I feel about the app. And so, whatever we can constitutionally do to address a legitimate national security threat, which I believe TikTok is, then we should do it. So that's where I am.
These are two separate issues, the national security threat and the brain toxin. I'm sure
Yes,
that quite
right.
a lot of totally distinct, and I'm sure quite a lot of lawmakers had the reaction that I had when you read reactions from young people saying, you can't take this away from me, this is my primary source of information, I learn more about this than I learn more from this application than I do in school. Like the blood rushes from your face when you
Yikes.
hear things
Yeah.
like that. But Jack, to stay with you briefly, what is Donald Trump thinking here? He comes out and he's rather forcefully, he's been softer in the interim, but rather forcefully saying, look, TikTok's not the problem, Facebook is. Joe Biden is on on TikTok. Donald Trump's campaign is not, as far as I know, but Democrats obviously have a vested interest in pandering to the youth vote and have been warning us for quite some time that the party that tries to get rid of TikTok will suffer profound electoral consequences when the youth vote turns on them. But that's not Donald Trump's concern. The Washington Post speculates that the investor class has been getting to him, and he so desperately needs them, courting them for campaign cash and contributions. So is it just money? Sounds like it's just money.
What is Donald Trump thinking? Noah, you're
The
asking me a
eternal question.
question that scholars and oracles have been trying to figure out for many years now. What is he thinking? Well, there are a couple of possible explanations. One is that he's just motivated purely by the moment's personal animus. I mean, we let us recall that Trump almost performed like this divestiture, or I guess signed on to something like this divestiture while he was still president, but then didn't. And the one part of his motivation for that was, if I remember correctly, that the TikTok was used against him in some way. I think people used the app to buy up tickets to a rally of his and then keep people out of it, something like that. So he was mad at the app then. And now he's mad at Facebook for some reason, or so we think.
Booting him off after January 6th, for one thing.
That's yeah, that
Right.
could be it. But the financial, I don't know enough, and I don't think enough is known to draw definitive conclusions about the financial motivation. I will say though that if it's true, it really defeats one of the main points of Donald Trump as a political figure. Think back to these arguments he was making in 2015, 2016 about how the system is corrupt. I know because I've corrupted it, and that's why I'm incorruptible. So if he can be easily swayed by money now, and especially, and not just for any cause, but for this particular cause, I mean, what's the point of a wrecking ball like that if the wrecking ball can be directed by corporate interests? Because that's what we're talking about. And in this case, we're talking about corporate interests with ties to the Chinese government, which we don't like. So I'm just perplexed, and in trying to figure out what Trump is thinking, I am a bit at a loss, as many people have been, because no explanation is very charitable. So
That's a good point. And there might be kabuki involved in the White House, the Biden White House, saying they support the passage of this bill, but regardless, they should get credit for it given their investment in the notion that this is the key to unlocking the youth vote. Christine, the bill's more libertarian opponents, Congressman Tom Massey, Rand Paul, Mike Lee, they claim, for the most part, unsourced, I think, but nevertheless, a deeply held, sincere conviction, I believe, that this is a Trojan horse, that it's designed to give the United States government more power to stifle speech that it doesn't like. And the United States government is, to the libertarian mind, always the greater threat than any foreign adversary. Why are they both paranoid and wrong?
Well, this actually this particular episode is a perfect example on either side of how low trust a society we've become. The communist Chinese government understands that and wants to use TikTok to exploit that, whether it's to lobby for a particular piece of legislation or to upend our upcoming elections. The libertarians want to see any single effort to narrow the horizon of a big tech platform as a threat to all of us. And here's where I do think they have a point and where there is some validity to their concern. We do know that these big tech platforms have been more than willing to work with the federal government a little bit under Trump and to a broad extent under the Biden administration to silence people, to take them off certain platforms, to prevent them from posting things in clear violation of their First Amendment rights. There are cases before the Supreme Court right now about a lot of these issues. They're very important issues. They are not going to be resolved in the short term. This is a generational conflict that's going to be waged both in the courts and in the court of public opinion. But where I think they are really missing the point now, and where I would just encourage them to just be quiet and listen to Representative Mike Gallagher, who actually knows what he's talking about here.
Always a good idea to listen to
yes,
him.
we should all listen to him all the time. I'm still in denial that he's leaving Congress. I hope he comes back to public service in some form down the line. But he very narrowly tailored this bill to address those concerns. If you actually read the legislation, what they're doing, the grandstanding they're doing on the House floor about this is very misguided and actually quite cynical. And I think they're going to be they're on the wrong side here in a number of ways, not just that they're on the side of the communist Chinese government, but they're wrong about the how this platform can be tailored and what the motivation of the CCP is in wanting to keep it as it is. So I think they're wrong, as you said, but they also are kind of they're expending political capital talking about a broader issue that does raise First Amendment concerns and does raise a lot of people's concerns who aren't libertarians, including me, about the power of these big tech platforms and their ability to censor. And are they publishers or are they platforms and all this? That's important. And so I think they're
But none of that applies here.
Focusing on that.
None of that applies here, right?
Right. No, this is not what this is about, but they have that's their hobby horse.
They've imported all those arguments, which actually imperils the arguments that they've been making against platforms like Facebook and TikTok. All right.
No, briefly, should we explain how, because sometimes in these conversations, people like us sort of take for granted the connection between the CCP and this app. Should we elaborate on why that we plausibly think that's the case?
Well, Jack, you're setting yourself up nicely, so go for it.
Well, there's basically in China, there's a national security law that demands and obligates any private is in quote, some people will watch this, but most people will listen to it. So private is in quote marks, private business to hand over data to the government. And also, I can't remember the specifics of this. My colleague Jimmy Quinn, who hilariously, this is his bailiwick, and he's on vacation this week. But I mean, this is gonna still be an issue when he comes back. But he has explained how I believe there's official or government officials who are involved in ByteDance's, the parent company of TikTok's corporate leadership in China. So that no company in China is truly private. There's the entanglement between state and business in that country is it's hard to decipher. It's sort of like
it's formalized. Yes, it's not as though it's sort of a understood sotto voce relationship.
No, yeah, right. It's formalized, but you can't. Sometimes it's meant to be to deceive people in other countries that into there being actual private entities, whereas really there's not. So that's why there's a concern about the entanglement of these entities.
All right, so let's say, Christine, this thing passes, it's signed into law. ByteDance bites the bullet, as it were, divests rather than scuttles the whole project, which, by the way, is kind of up in the air. They may just decide that the whole enterprise isn't worth keeping around because its point is to sow discord in the West, but I digress. It's not at all clear that it would have much of a political impact on the discourse. If that's what everybody's expecting, that all of a sudden everything gets better, I don't necessarily think that is what we're going to see. Jack? you can tell me your thoughts on this one. Let's say we get rid of TikTok tomorrow. What happens to the political discourse? Nothing, right?
Well, people will talk about TikTok's obliteration, but presumably, if it just disappeared entirely tomorrow, that's a massive market gap that some tech company native to the United States would fill almost instantly. And then this brings up, you mentioned that there are separate issues here. There's the speech that's actually on the platform and the ownership of the platform. Probably the speech that's on the platform more in this new platform. I'm sure there will be some way that things like Osama bin Laden's thoughts about America will percolate, and that will still things like that will still remain a problem. But
I had forgotten all about that episode. That's another one that we need to explain. Yeah, where TikTokers rediscovered the Osama bin Laden's tract by bin Laden that they found absolutely just captivating and
yeah, good stuff. I'm just glad that the Unabomber's manifesto didn't show up. That's a relief. Although maybe Christine has thoughts about that.
Yeah, I think Jack is sitting here waving his 30-year-old status in our faces, and I'm much older than 30, and my answer is always, go read a book. But I think actually they would find something valuable in the Unabomber's rants against technology. And the problem is they have no context. And I think that the episode that I think most galvanized not only a lot of the public, but a lot of people on Capitol Hill was the propaganda that was pushed through TikTok, in particular, that platform, post October 7th, when it came to the Israel Gaza war. Because
really,
I think, yeah,
you think that moved the needle?
The massive amount of pro Hamas propaganda, and that's the only word to describe it, that America's youth, who much of whom didn't have a lot of context for understanding this event, saw, and how that changed their minds, is exactly why we should be concerned about what that means if an enemy power is the conduit for that sort of thing. So I would say that we actually have a lot of concerns. I would not endorse the Unabomber, however, but it is concerning that people are turning to the philosopher sages of the TikTok generation are bin Laden and that Harvard graduate Ted Kaczynski. Not good. Not good.
Right.
But TikTok and its consequences have been a disaster for the human race, however.
that's you'd have to read the Unabomber's stylings to get that one. So let's move on briefly from the TikTok nightmare debacle to State of the Union fallout. I know it feels like it's been a universe has passed, an epoch has passed since exactly 1 week ago, but it was just 1 week ago today that we all submitted ourselves to a scolding session from the president, who did so at the loudest possible decibel level he could achieve. It's not really much of a defense of the president's conduct, but Biden wasn't really expected to deliver a State of the Union address. He was expected by his fellow party members to deliver a campaign speech. He needed to stand upright and maintain modest cogency for exactly 75 minutes, well past his bedtime. That was the hurdle, and he cleared it. That's all they needed to see from him, that he could do one more race, and they were positively giddy. But in the interim, we have seen, and I don't know if it's especially fair to say that we should see this or expect to see this, because there's no such thing as a State of the Union polling bump, but there is no State of the Union polling bump. Democrats may have bought their own hype and expected at least a little bit of a titter from the polling environment to suggest, at least among Democrats, that they no longer have these concerns that Joe Biden just doesn't have another race in him. At least he has the vigor to make it through to the end of the year. We haven't seen any indication that Democratic fears have been allayed. Christine, let's briefly talk about, first of all, the reaction in the polling, and second of all, some of the policy proposals that haven't gotten a lot of attention in that speech, one of which has really driven me absolutely insane. I don't know why it's not getting as much attention, is the president's desire to make inflation worse. Specifically, he said that his plan is to subsidize the housing market for first-time home buyers and to give tax credits to those who have starter homes, want to put them on the market. Yeah. This is a problem if your whole objective is to restore price stability to the housing market. The whole point of interest rate hikes is to make money more expensive so that they can borrow. It's harder to borrow because it's a demand limited market with very little inventory. And he would be increasing demand, which runs counter to his interests. Am
Yes.
I reading this right? Do they
Yes.
perceive themselves to be better served by increasing inflation now at the risk of a breakdown later, under the assumption that I guess most voters don't understand the economics of the whole thing? They won't put two and two together.
Well, I think I think there was a huge amount of condescending assumption in that particular policy proposal. But I do think, to your first question, the reason we didn't see a polling bump at all, even among Democrats, is that that speech was meant to reassure a very small sliver of Democratic voters, and that's the chattering classes in the mainstream media, because they had been very restive leading up to the State of the Union, and they'd even said things like, "Wow, he's pretty old," and "Gee, do we think he can actually do the job?" And "Boy, shouldn't he be running a more vigorous campaign already?" So those murmurings were coming from his left flank, and his very near left flank, not his far left flank. And add to that the constant criticism he's been getting from his far left progressive squad-like flank on his policy towards Israel. He had to calm those folks down, and I think the speech did that for them for a short period of time. What it didn't do is make any
It's been a
sense.
week.
It's been a week. I know, that's like, like you said, it's like dog years now in politics. I mean, it's insane. But these sorts of proposals, it reminded me of his student loan. And again, see, Jack started it. I'm doing air quotes, forgiveness, debt forgiveness. He likes to transfer the burden of responsibility from people who actually show up and do their work to people who borrow money and don't want to pay it back. And he should really be looking at the economic numbers right now. There are lots of signs this week alone that inflation is hotter, as the economists like to say. It's getting a little hot again. And this has long been a problem, even in the suburbs of DC. I stopped to get gas, not long ago, and they still have those gas pump stickers that say "I did that" with Joe Biden's finger pointing at it. And that's after gas prices have come down a bit. This was Loudoun County, so that could explain some of it. But he's not Bidenomics flopped, right? They tried to package his economic policies as some sort of great new thing, and that didn't work with the public, because the public can't afford a lot of things that they could afford 4, 5, 6 years ago, and their memories are long when they look back on their bills and they look back on their mortgage payments and their interest rates. So I think they're making a mistake here, and I think it's another sign that the Democratic Party, although lunch pail Joe riding the Amtrak likes to talk about himself as a working class guy with working class understanding, this is an elite, highly educated, extremely wealthy party now. And the people who set the tone and the reflection they see of themselves in the media doesn't understand what a lot of voters are concerned about. And I think when he says those things, again, he's talking at a 30,000-foot level. He needs to talk at around people's kitchen tables, not Katie Britt's kitchen table, because that's a scary place, but anywhere else is fine.
Jack, to Christine's point that there's sort of an effort underway on the part of Democrats to mimic Android-like what they think people would actually consider a really pressing issue when it comes to inflation. And I think that's manifest in the obsession over quote unquote shrinkflation, which Joe Biden, they brought that to the Super Bowl.
Right.
Joe Biden, they kept it in the State of the Union speech. And it's essentially the idea here that you're getting less product for the same amount of money, which is a direct response to inflation, but they're trying to retail it as though it is the cause
big bad
of
corporations.
Inflation.
Yes, big bad corporations and rich people out to get them.
So yeah, this predicated first of all on a very dim estimation of the intelligence of your audience. But let's put that aside for a second.
We would never do something like that here.
Absolutely not. I refuse to. And I have a high estimation of my guest intelligence and my audience's intelligence. But this just doesn't go toward what his political goal is, right? Which is to suggest that inflation is behind us. I mean, that's what he needs when he's going into the election next year. He needs you to not be thinking about inflation. How does reminding everybody that inflation is busily robbing from you the X amount of chips or a certain number of ounces of Gatorade, how does that help him in the general election? It seems extremely harebrained.
Well, if there are any brains to it, then I guess they're harebrains. But I think it bespeaks a fundamental lack of agency and intent on the part of the Biden White House / campaign. And actually, I'll briefly digress because describing those two things as one provides a good occasion to lament just how relentlessly partisan that State of the Union was.
Yes.
I'm sort of shocked because even in prior addresses by Trump and Biden, there was a pretension to to a level of neutrality and formality, but that's just gone. I mean, if you a small sign of this, if you hit Control F in the transcript of the speech, you'll find a bunch of exclamation points. That's sort of how it was delivered. But you will not
Really
find,
bad sign.
yeah, what you will not find is the phrase "State of the Union." He did not actually say that stupid any iteration of that stupid "the State of the Union is strong," which is always kind of a cringy thing whenever it appears in one of these speeches, but
He did
that
eventually get around to it, but it took him like 25 minutes before he actually. I mean, he wouldn't even allow himself to be introduced by the speaker. He was just champing at the bit. They had him on a shot of B12 that like you have never had
Oh,
in
it
your
was
life.
more than B12, I suspect.
don't make
he
me
did
reference
get there.
comfortably numb again. But yeah, as for inflation specifically, I think that he's just looking for anything that will defray the attack. So inflation is over, but also it's not my fault. So the border. So think about the border. The border is not a crisis, but also if it's a crisis, then it's not my fault either. There's a general inclination to transfer responsibility and blame, which really is rife throughout our society as a whole. But Biden is a particularly apt demonstrator of that unfortunate tendency, and that's how he's going to campaign. So if there is any strategy to what he's doing, which I question, that seems to be it. Just find anything that will get him through the next couple of months or even the next couple of moments, which oddly is something that he and Trump have in common. And no, you would say that the two of them have way more in common than many political observers would like to admit. But I'll certainly grant that this is a commonality that they have. Although Trump, on at least on the border, has a much clearer plan, which is basically to say, Biden, this is your fault. Like, it's your fault. It was not as bad when I was president, and now it's worse. What changed? You. It's your fault.
Well, and I'm glad you brought up the border because this is a hobby horse of mine. If you mispronounce the name of a murder victim who was murdered by someone who you allowed to come and cross the border illegally, and then apologize
Well, let's
within
get to that.
48
Let's
hours
get
for
to that.
saying illegal and not for misrepresenting this young woman's name, that's not good that's just bad politics for you, but it's also morally irresponsible.
Well, more that moment. I mean, first of all, that moment was the best moment of his speech, and it wasn't in the speech. It was the only time where he approximated the kind of passion that is shared by anybody outside his coalition for the effects of his governance. And he can say, you know, this is the kind of thing that just gets me all heated and riled up, and I share your frustration, right? But he didn't do that. And why didn't he do that? Because the speech, the whole point of the speech was to buy him some dispensation, some reprieve from his activist left flank so he could actually campaign for the presidency in a way that is likely to win it. And he didn't get it.
No.
And not only did he not get it, that he bowed right back down to them, saying, you know, obsequiously apologizing for the use of that language, which is entirely understandable. It drives progressive nuts, but it's outside their very small circles. It's really not all that offensive. And then he went further and he was like, no, you know, the illegal immigrants, the people who murdered this woman, they built this country. I can't understand
The
why
country is full of corpses, just like the Great Wall of China, I guess.
why would the administration? I mean, the administration knows, at least in a way, they know, because that's what the speech was designed to do, that they have to mollify this part of their base. But why do you have to mollify it? Because you move past it to the point where you can talk to the voters who will actually win or lose this election, who are in the middle, who are not part of your coalition, and they just can't get to step two. They're stuck on step one.
Those voters are still, you know, Trump is posting. I mean, it's still very small gains, but Trump is ahead of Biden in those swing states. Those are the voters Biden needs. Biden this week is going all over the country. He's actually running a campaign this week for the first time where he's keeping a schedule that is akin to one that a vigorous president running for re-election would keep. And, you know, he's still behind. Right now, if the election were held, Trump would probably win.
Fair enough. All right.
We just had to pause for a moment of silence after that. I'm pointing out.
We must acknowledge our harsh reality. So moving on from ancient history last week to this morning, a little bit more, topical. We're talking on Thursday afternoon, March 14th, and this morning, Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer took to the floor of the Senate, where he delivered as barn burner a speech as he's capable of. Where he positively savaged the Netanyahu government of Israel, in remarks that I don't think are going to age especially well. Quote, I believe that holding a new election once the war starts to wind down would give Israelis an opportunity to express their vision of the post-war future. He continues that Netanyahu, quote, has put himself in a coalition with far-right extremists and is, quote, too willing to tolerate a civilian death toll in Gaza. He added that Israel, quote, cannot survive as a pariah, and that its conduct is isolating it further, in quote, further isolation of the Jewish community in the world to the extent that its future would be jeopardized is going to be an outgrowth of this war. So Jack calling for elections in a foreign country as though he has any command over it or understanding apparently of how elections are held in this parliamentary system. Two, sort of blaming the Jews, Israeli Jews, for the hostility of the international community in their defense of their national interests. And three, self-styling himself the voice of the Jewish community. He said he's speaking for the silent majority of American Jews who are deeply conflicted over this war. I don't know what he set out to achieve, save for exactly what Joe Biden set out to achieve, an attempt to mollify an unappeasable and very unsympathetic small band of constituents Democrats have courted. But they can't see beyond it. And they're not that group that this speech was meant for, they're not going to be satisfied by it. They're not satisfied by anything. They don't want speeches. They want Joe Biden to give up on Israel. They want Israel cast out to the sea. And it's going to alienate everybody else. So what is the point? What was the point of this exercise?
Oh, what is the point? Well, so I'm going to steal a line that you used on National Review's editor's podcast earlier this week, that much of American politics now is theater, and this leaves us as theater critics. So what to make of Schumer's theater, or his shenanigans, as I decided to call them earlier today? I think the explanation you offered is probably the best one, but I would just add this qualification to it, that he's trying to mollify or appease this this Hamasnic or Hamas sympathetic bloc that has been perceived on the left-wing coalition. Hamas adjacent, yeah, call it whatever you want. That probably is louder, has a louder voice than its numbers actually bear out, but we'll leave that aside for now. But he's doing it in a way that he knows will probably not have any consequences, in the sense that Israel is not going to take political orders from him. They're not going to have an election on Chuck Schumer's timetable. So this is just kind of a freebie for him to say, to indicate like, hey, people, I don't like what's going on, what Netanyahu's doing, but there's no real cost to it. Although there may be a cost. I mean, now
there is a cost.
I think there's a cost.
Can you imagine? Do you think? And I don't think this is true, but maybe there was somebody in Schumer's office who thought, "Man, we're going to give this speech, and the government's going to collapse. Like the entire Israeli government will implode. There will be a free fall for all. Benny Gantz will emerge victorious, and we will have finally a government we can negotiate with." They can't possibly have convinced themselves of that, especially since the opposite has occurred in the hour since he gave this speech. The whole of Israel seems united in opposition to this, including the opposition parties, including Benny Gantz, including the former prime minister, the blue and white coalition. Christine, were they actually thinking that this would be a valuable contribution to Israeli politics, or is this entirely just aimed at domestic?
First of all, the amount of hubris that Chuck Schumer demonstrated today should be publicly shamed for it for years. So that's one consequence. This is a guy, let's remember, who has run. He is the highest ranking elected Jewish American official, right? He talks about that a lot. He talks about how, I am this representative of the people. I really care about Israel. I'm going to fight for,
He casts himself in a biblical role.
Totally. So that has been his thing all along. So today he turned his back on that. And for what? First of all, we don't go around scolding our allies and telling them how to run their governments. Okay. This is not only a fellow democracy in a region with no democracy except for Israel. It is our ally. It's like us scolding the Brits when they have a change of government or going through Brexit. That is not our job.
Let's remember.
Right. No, I mean, this is not the role of,
but Obama
of the
wasn't
Senate majority
presenting
leader.
himself as though he was some sort of a practicing, deeply religious person. I mean, he did occasionally.
Like he was
up...
the Church of England and like telling.
Right.
I mean, Chuck Schumer is saying he is an instrument of God.
Right.
This is what he's saying in the introduction to this speech. Shomer, this is my name. This is my name. I am a guardian. I am a keeper of the. My family kept the ghetto. They watched the ghetto. Yes. I watched the walls. Just like, yeah, how? If you were a truly God-fearing person, you'd never do that. You'd be scared to death.
So the cynic in me thinks that what they're, first of all, he's providing cover for Biden, so Biden can continue his Israel policy, and they're throwing this bone to the far left of their coalition, which is really, look, we're going to have a really interesting Democratic Party convention in Chicago, because just this week, when DNC officials tried to meet with a bunch of these pro-Palestinian groups, they're refusing to meet with them. They are planning quite a long, hot summer at that convention, and Biden and his reelection team are correctly worried. But what strikes me about this is that it's ridiculous. I think what they're trying to do is give themselves an escape hatch on this conflict. And that escape hatch is to just keep saying two-state solution, two-state solution, two-state solution, knowing full well that that is unlikely to happen. Look at the polls in Israel. Israelis do not want a two-state solution any longer. That is very clear, and that is along this political spectrum. Look at if you're going to have a two-state solution, first you got to get rid of you got to crush Hamas. You got to return those hostages, which include American citizens. Neither of those things is likely to happen before November. But I think what Schumer and some of the Democrats are going to try to do is say, well, look, we've been trying to have a ceasefire, a two-state solution. We just want peace. We want everyone to get along, but it's this terrible BB. Meanwhile, that we are still supporting Israel. It's important to say the Biden administration is still doing the right thing by Israel, but they cannot have this schizophrenic say one thing, do another for much longer, because their own side is not going to allow it anymore.
All right, that is going to do it for us. You've been watching Issues with Noah Rothman on Two-Way. I'd like to thank my guests, Christine Rosen and Jack Butler. Thank you very much, both of you. Christine Rosen, you can catch her work at commentary.org, Commentary Magazine, and you can read Jack Butler where I am at nationalreview.com. You can find me on Twitter, X, at Noah C. Rothman. And of course, thank you for tuning in and watching us. We will see you next week.